When people hear spirit and soul, they often assume they mean the same thing. Two religious words, one basic idea. But the biblical language is not always doing that, because one word can lean toward breath, life, animating force. The other can lean toward self, living being, inner person. And if you flatten them into one interchangeable blur, you can shrink the passage before it even starts. Spirit is not always soul. Same world, different emphasis. Here's the map. Soul often reads closer to the living self. The life of the creature, the person is a living being. Spirit often reads closer to breath, wind, animating force, or what moves beyond mere physical description. One can lean toward the self as living life. One can lean toward what gives life, moves life, or reaches beyond the visible frame. Start with soul. Soul is not just a ghost word. In biblical language, it can point to the self, the life, the living being. That is why soul language can sound personal. Hunger, thirst, desire, grief. The inner life of the person is living self. Soul often feels closer to the being that lives. Now, spirit. Spirit is not merely a poetic synonym for soul. Spirit often carries breath, wind, movement, animating force. Sometimes what comes from God, sometimes what empowers, sometimes what is described in contrast to flesh or outward form. That is why spirit can feel less like the self and more like what moves, gives life, stirs, or transcends mere bodily description. Soul may describe the living self. Spirit may describe the animating breath or higher dimension of life. Here is the damage when you collapse them. You turn two different emphases into one vague religious blur. You miss when the text is talking about the living self and when it is pointing toward breath, movement, or animating life. And once you do that, the verse can start sounding flatter than it is. So, here's the practical decode. When you see soul, ask, is this about the self as living being, the life of the person? The inner life under strain, desire, grief, or longing. When you see spirit, ask, is this about breath, wind, animating force, or what moves beyond the merely physical frame? That distinction changes the reading, because one word often leans toward the living self, the other often leans toward breath, force, movement, or what gives life its deeper dimension. So, next time you hear spirit and soul, do not flatten them too fast. Ask what kind of life the passage is describing. That distinction changes the weight of the verse. Next, decode, heart not equal to mind. That's the word. Now read it differently.